My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 34 years old, a senior project manager at a fast-growing tech firm in downtown Chicago, and a full-time single dad. Most mornings in my apartment don't feel like mornings. They feel like controlled chaos. "Daddy, you're burning the toast again," my 6-year-old daughter Lily yelled from the kitchen table. "I'm not burning it," I said, flipping it quickly. "I'm giving it character." She giggled. "That sound? That's the reason I wake up every day and keep moving." Being a single father wasn't part of the plan. Losing my wife 3 years ago changed everything. Since then, every tie I've worn, every meeting I've survived, every late-night report I've submitted, it's all been for Lily. That morning, though, wasn't just another day. It was executive presentation day. And not just in front of the board. In front of her. Isabella Morgan. CEO. 40 years old. Self-made. Ruthless in business. Untouchable in reputation. At least, that's what everyone said. I stood in front of the hallway mirror, trying to knot my navy blue silk tie while Lily watched me carefully. "You're doing it wrong," she said seriously. "I know," I muttered. My hands were steady during million-dollar negotiations. But that morning, they wouldn't cooperate. Because today was different. Today, I wasn't just presenting a redevelopment strategy for the company's expansion. Today, I was presenting directly to Isabella Morgan for the first time. And for some reason, that mattered. More than it should have. Downtown Chicago was sharp and bright when I stepped out of the car. The glass tower of Morgan & Company reflected the morning sun like it owned the sky. Inside, the lobby was already buzzing. Marble floors. Polished steel. The quiet hum of ambition. And then the room shifted. You can always tell when power enters a space. The conversations softened. Heads turned. She walked in wearing a fitted deep red dress that was bold without trying too hard. Sharp heels. Diamond studs. Hair smooth and effortless. No rush. No wasted motion. Isabella Morgan didn't walk like she needed approval. She walked like the building belonged to her. Our eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. Professional. Measured. But something in her gaze lingered. I told myself I imagined that part. 10 minutes later, I stood outside the executive conference room, adjusting my tie again. Still wrong. I exhaled slowly. "Mr. Carter." Her voice was calm. Controlled. Smooth. I turned. She was closer than I expected. Up close, she didn't just look powerful. She looked precise. Observant. Her eyes moved to my collar. "Your tie is uneven," she said simply. I glanced down. I had help from a 6-year-old. A faint smile touched her lips. "May I?" For a second, my brain stopped working. "Of course," I said. She stepped closer. Close enough that I could catch the subtle scent of something elegant. Not overpowering. Just refined. Her fingers brushed the fabric of my tie. Steady. Confident. She adjusted the knot with careful movements, smoothing it down against my shirt. "Presentation nerves?" she asked softly. "I don't usually get them. But today you are." It wasn't a question. Her fingers paused near my collar. That's when I made the mistake. I looked at her lips. Just for a second. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet mine. And she didn't step back. "If you keep staring at my lips like that," she whispered quietly enough that no one else could hear, "I'm going to assume you're not thinking about quarterly projections." My pulse jumped. "I apologize," I said quickly, though my voice came out lower than I expected. She tilted her head slightly. "Don't," she replied. "Confidence looks better on you than apology." Then she stepped back. Professional again. "Let's see if your strategy is as strong as your recovery." And just like that, she opened the conference room door. The presentation should have been the hardest part of my day. It wasn't. Standing next to her at the head of the table, that was harder. She asked sharp questions. Direct ones. "What's your long-term scalability plan? How does this reduce overhead within 18 months? What's the human cost of this restructure?" Most executives focus only on numbers. She focused on people. I answered carefully, clearly. And with every response, I could feel something shift in the room. Respect. When I finished, there was a brief silence. She studied me. Not the slides. Me. Then she nodded once. Well prepared. Strategic. Practical. A pause. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Simple words. But from her, they felt earned. The board members began gathering their things. The room cleared. Until it was just the two of us. She walked toward the window overlooking the city. You mentioned in your file you have a daughter, she said without turning. Yes. How old? 6. She nodded slightly. That explains it. Explains what? The way you lead, she said. Protective. Measured. Long-term thinking. She turned then. Softer now. Being responsible for someone changes the way you make decisions. It does. She studied me again. And for the first time, there was no board. No company. No title between us. Just two adults in a quiet room. Who fixes your tie on mornings she's not there? She asked. The question caught me off guard. No one, I answered honestly. A slow breath escaped her. Well, she said lightly, you're going to need to learn. I won't always be around to rescue you before meetings. There was humor there. But something else too. Something unspoken. She walked past me toward the door. Then paused. Without turning around, she said quietly. Next time you look at my lips, Daniel, at least have the courage to admit why. My name. Not Mr. Carter. Daniel. The door closed behind her. And I stood there alone in the conference room, heart racing like I had just run a marathon. This wasn't just attraction. It wasn't just power dynamics. It was something sharper. More dangerous. Because for the first time in 3 years, I felt something wake up inside me. And I wasn't sure if that was brave. Or reckless. But one thing was certain. This was no longer just another ordinary morning. And Isabella Morgan was no longer just my CEO. This was the beginning of something. I just didn't know yet. If it would build me up. Or break every rule I had sworn to follow. There's something about silence that makes the truth louder. 3 days after the presentation, I tried to convince myself that what happened outside that conference room meant nothing. It was a moment. A charged one. But still, just a moment. That's what I told myself. Until her assistant called. Mr. Carter, Ms. Morgan would like to see you in the executive library at 6:30 p.m. The executive library. Not her office. Not a boardroom. The library. After hours. That wasn't normal. The library at Morgan & Company isn't what most people imagine. It's private. Reserved for senior leadership. Floor-to-ceiling dark walnut shelves. Soft leather chairs. Warm amber lighting. A quiet kind of luxury. By the time I walked in, most of the building was empty. The city outside the tall windows was shifting from gold to deep blue. She was standing near one of the shelves, flipping through a file. Tonight, she wasn't in a bold red dress. She wore a burgundy satin blouse tucked into a fitted black skirt. Elegant. Strong. Understated. But somehow more dangerous. You're punctual, she said without looking up. You said 6:30. A faint smile touched her lips. I like that about you. I stepped further inside. The door clicked shut behind me. The sound echoed more than it should have. She closed the file and placed it on the table. This expansion project, she began, professional tone in place, it needs refinement in the community integration section. I nodded, stepping closer to the table. For the next 10 minutes, we talked strategy. Budgets. Long-term hiring projections. Local partnerships. All business. Except it didn't feel like just business. There was an undercurrent. Every time our hands reached for the same document. Every time her eyes lingered half a second longer than necessary. And then, she shifted. Daniel, she said softly. That was the first time she'd used my name in the office while we were alone. Yes. Sit. Not a request. I sat across from her at the long wooden table. The lights above cast a warm glow across her face, softening the sharp CEO edges. "Tell me something," she said, folding her hands. "How do you balance it?" "Balance what?" "Being a father, and being ambitious." The question wasn't about the project. "It's not balance," I answered honestly. "It's survival. I don't get the luxury of falling apart." Her gaze sharpened. "And who takes care of you?" I let out a quiet breath. "No one. That's not how it works." She leaned back slowly. "That's exactly how burnout works." Silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, but heavy. She stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city. "Do you know why I built this library?" she asked. I shook my head. "Because when I started this company, I had no one to talk to. No mentor. No partner. Just pressure." She paused. "Books don't judge. They don't compete. You don't strike me as someone who feels alone." She gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Leadership is isolating. The higher you climb, the fewer people speak to you honestly." She turned then. "And you're honest." I stood too. "That's not always an advantage." "It is to me." There it was again. That subtle shift. Professional walls lowering, just slightly. She walked back toward the table, but this time she didn't sit. She stopped closer to me. Close enough that I could see the detail in her eyes. Close enough to feel the warmth from her presence. "You've been avoiding me," she said quietly. "I've been maintaining professionalism." "Is that what we're calling it?" "What else would we call it?" She stepped closer. "Self-protection?" My jaw tightened slightly. "I work for you." "Yes. And I respect that." "And if I told you I respect you?" she asked. "That would complicate things." She studied my face carefully. "You're afraid of losing my job?" "Yes." She shook her head slowly. "No. You're afraid of wanting something." That landed harder than I expected. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "Don't I?" Her voice lowered. "You looked at me in that hallway like you hadn't looked at anyone in a long time." My pulse shifted. "That's not appropriate. Neither is pretending it didn't happen." The air felt thinner. She reached past me for a document on the table. Her arm brushed mine. Light contact. But deliberate. "If this crosses a line for you," she said softly, "tell me." I swallowed. "It does. And yet you're still here." That was the problem. She was right. "I'm not reckless," I said carefully. "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm interested." Silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was electric. The city lights outside were fully alive now. She looked toward the window briefly. "Do you ever think about what you want?" she asked. "I want stability for my daughter." "That's responsibility," she said gently. "Not desire." I didn't answer. Because the truth. Desire had been asleep for years. Until her. She stepped closer again. This time there was no table between us. "Daniel," she said softly, "if I asked you to have dinner with me outside this building, what would you say?" My heart pounded once. Hard. That would be inappropriate. That wasn't my question. I met her eyes. I'd say yes. The honesty surprised even me. Her lips parted slightly. "Thank you for not lying." The distance between us had disappeared. Not touching. But close enough to blur judgment. "If this ruins your reputation," I began. She shook her head. "I don't make decisions out of fear." "I do," I admitted. Her expression softened. "That's because you have more to lose." Her hand lifted slightly. Not touching. Hovering near my tie again. Almost like the first morning. "You deserve something that isn't just survival," she whispered. "And what are you offering?" She held my gaze. "A choice." My voice dropped lower. "And if I choose wrong? Then we deal with it like adults." The tension coiled tighter. She glanced briefly at my mouth. Then back to my eyes. The same unspoken awareness from the hallway. "If you keep looking at me like that," she murmured softly, "this library is going to stop feeling very professional." I forced myself to step back half an inch. Breathing steady. "I don't want to disrespect you." Her answer came immediately. Then don't. It wasn't a rejection. It was a boundary. And somehow that made it more intense. She moved away first this time. Creating space. Regaining control. Dinner, she said calmly. Friday. Public place. No secrets. You're serious. I don't play games, Daniel. I believed her. She walked toward the door. Then paused. One more thing. I waited. If at any point this feels like pressure, you walk away. Understood? Yes. Good. She opened the door. Professional mask back in place. But just before stepping out, she looked over her shoulder. And for a brief second. She wasn't the CEO. She was just a woman who hadn't allowed herself to want something in a long time. Friday, she said softly. And then she was gone. I stood alone in the executive library, surrounded by books and ambition and silence. But this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like a beginning. And I realized something as I walked out into the Chicago night. This wasn't just attraction anymore. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't fantasy. It was risk. And for the first time in years, I was considering taking it. Chicago looks different after 10 p.m. Less noise. Less ego. More honesty. I should have gone home. Lily was already asleep by the time I stepped back into the office building. The excuse I gave myself was simple: I needed to finalize numbers before Friday's board summary. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, she was still here. Her car was in the executive parking spot. And some part of me wanted to know if she was thinking about Friday the same way I was. The upper floors were nearly empty. Only half the lights were on. The building felt bigger at night. Quieter. More dangerous. As I passed the executive wing, I noticed the balcony doors at the end of the hall slightly open. A faint breeze moved the sheer curtains. And there she was. Isabella Morgan. Standing alone against the Chicago skyline. She wasn't in her usual bold red tonight. She wore a deep wine-colored blouse, silk, subtle shine, sleeves slightly rolled at the wrist. Black tailored trousers. Heels abandoned near the door. Barefoot on the stone balcony. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just watched her. The wind caught a strand of her hair. She didn't fix it. She looked human. Most people are afraid of heights, she said quietly, without turning around. I'm not most people, I replied. She glanced over her shoulder. Her eyes softened when she saw it was me. I thought you left. I could say the same. She turned back toward the skyline. Sometimes I stay late when I need to think. About the company. About control. That word lingered. I stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cool. Crisp. The city lights below felt like stars that had fallen to earth. You don't seem like someone who lacks control, I said. She gave a faint smile. Control is easy in boardrooms. Harder in silence. The wind shifted again. The distance between us was a few feet. Professional. Safe. So, she said calmly, are you here to talk numbers? No. Honesty again. She turned fully this time. And what are you here for, Daniel? Her voice wasn't teasing. It was steady. Careful. I walked closer, slowly, until we were standing side by side at the railing. Friday, I said. Is that a mistake? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied the city below. Mistakes are impulsive, she said finally. This isn't impulsive. It feels risky. Everything worth wanting is. I exhaled. You're my CEO. Yes. And I have a daughter. Her expression softened slightly at that. I know. And if this goes wrong, it won't affect your position. You can't promise that. She looked at me directly. I don't mix emotion with retaliation. I wasn't implying you would. I know, she said gently. You're protecting your world. There it was again. That ability she had to see through me. The wind moved between us. The air felt charged. Why me? I asked quietly. The question had been sitting in my chest for days. She didn't laugh. Didn't dodge it. Because you don't look at me like I'm untouchable. I don't. No, she said softly. You look at me like I'm a woman. The words settled heavy between us. You are, I said before I could stop myself. Her breath shifted. Subtle. But noticeable. We weren't touching. But we were closer now. Close enough to feel warmth. Close enough to sense hesitation. I don't do casual, she said quietly. Neither do I. She searched my face. For someone who claims to be cautious, you're standing very close to me. I haven't crossed any lines. Not physically. Her gaze dropped briefly to my mouth. Then returned to my eyes. And the silence stretched. Not awkward. Not comfortable. Just intense. I don't want to be reckless, I said. Then don't, she replied softly. You're not helping. A hint of a smile touched her lips. I'm not trying to. The city below pulsed with light. Cars moved like distant rivers. Up here, it felt like the world had narrowed to two people and one decision. She shifted slightly, leaning back against the railing. The movement brought her closer. Too close. If I moved an inch forward, we'd be touching. You know what the problem is, she said quietly. What? You think wanting something makes you weak. I swallowed. It makes me vulnerable. Yes, she agreed. And I can't afford that. Her voice softened. Daniel, vulnerability isn't a liability. It's trust. You trust me? She held my gaze. I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't. That did something to me. Something steady. Something dangerous. The wind picked up again, pushing her hair across her cheek. Without thinking, I reached up. Paused. Gave her time to pull away. She didn't. My fingers gently brushed the strand of hair back behind her ear. Light contact. Barely there. But electric. Her breath caught. You should be careful, she whispered. Why? Because if you keep touching me like that. Her voice trailed off. I felt my pulse in my throat. I'm going to forget we're standing outside my office. The honesty in her tone made it worse. I stepped closer. Slowly. Giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. Our faces were inches apart now. I could see the detail in her eyes. Could feel her breath. You said no secrets, I murmured. I meant it. Then tell me to stop. She didn't. Her hand lifted, resting lightly against my chest. Not pushing. Just there. A boundary. Or an invitation. I don't want to regret this, she said softly. You won't. You don't know that. You don't either. Her fingers tightened slightly against my shirt. The space between us disappeared. My forehead almost touched hers. Almost. If you keep looking at my lips like that, she whispered, the faintest tremor in her voice. My heart pounded once. Hard. I won't stop you. Time slowed. The city disappeared. The only thing that existed was the space between our mouths. I leaned in. And she inhaled sharply. Her hand pressed gently against my chest. Not rejection. Not fear. Restraint. We're not crossing that line tonight, she said, breath unsteady but voice firm. I froze. Searching her face. Why? Because if we do, she said quietly, there's no going back to professional. The word professional felt thin now. Fragile. You regret this? I asked. Her answer came immediately. No. She stepped back slightly, creating space. But not distance. I want this, she admitted. But I want it right. The maturity in that moment made it harder to argue. Harder to push. You're stronger than I expected, I said. So are you. We stood there again, side by side now. The intensity hadn't disappeared. It had shifted. From impulse to intention. Friday, she said softly. Friday, I agreed. As we walked back inside, the air felt different. Heavier. Charged with something unfinished. At the door, she paused again. Daniel? Yes. Next time, she said, her eyes holding mine steadily, I won't be the one stopping it. And then she walked down the hallway. Heels back on. CEO mask returning. Leaving me standing there on the balcony. Heart racing. knowing we had just come inches away from changing everything. And realizing something else entirely. The almost kiss wasn't the dangerous part. The dangerous part was that we both wanted more. Rumors don't start loud. They start in whispers. A pause when you walk into a room. A conversation that suddenly ends. A glance that lingers a little too long. By Monday morning, I felt it. The shift. I stepped off the elevator into the executive floor and caught two analysts mid-sentence. I'm just saying, she never stays late with anyone else. They stopped when they saw me. Professional smiles. Quick nods. But the damage was done. Word travels fast in buildings made of glass. And Morgan and Company was nothing but glass. I kept my head down. Focused on work. Focused on deliverables. Focused on being exactly what I'd always been: reliable, steady, disciplined. But every time I passed her office, I felt it. That invisible thread pulling tight between us. We hadn't crossed the line. But we had stepped close enough to see it clearly. And people could sense that. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Isabella Morgan. My office. 3 p.m. No emoji. No softness. CEO tone. At exactly 3 p.m., I knocked. Come in. Her voice was composed. Neutral. She sat behind her desk, cobalt blue blouse crisp against the sharp lines of the executive chair. Hair perfectly in place. Expression unreadable. If someone walked in right now, they'd see nothing but professionalism. Close the door, she said. I did. The quiet in her office felt heavier than usual. You've noticed it, she said calmly. Yes. Good. She folded her hands on the desk. I don't tolerate gossip. I'm aware. Her eyes lifted to meet mine. But this one isn't entirely unfounded. The honesty hit harder than denial would have. We haven't done anything wrong, I said. No, she agreed. But perception doesn't wait for proof. I stepped closer to the desk. Do you want me to transfer teams? The question cost more than I expected. Her jaw tightened slightly. No. It came out sharper than intended. She exhaled and softened her tone. No, she repeated. You are one of my strongest project leads. I will not move you because people are bored. The word bored carried edge. This could affect you more than me, I said. I can handle pressure. I know you can. She stood then. Slowly. Walking around the desk until there was nothing between us but air. You're thinking about your daughter, she said quietly. Yes. And your reputation. Yes. And me, she asked softly. That question stayed suspended between us. I answered honestly. Yes. Something flickered in her eyes. Not power. Not control. Something vulnerable. I've worked 20 years to build this company, she said quietly. Do you think I would risk it on something careless? No. Good. She stepped closer. Not touching. But close enough to feel the warmth radiating between us. I don't do scandal, she said firmly. If we move forward, it will be intentional. The phrase settled into my chest. If we move forward. Not if this ends. Not if this stops. Forward. A knock suddenly interrupted the tension. We stepped apart instinctively. Come in, she called smoothly. Her assistant entered with a folder. The board requested updated projections. Leave them on the desk, Isabella replied coolly. The assistant glanced between us briefly. Curiosity. Then she left. The door clicked shut again. The room shifted back to charged silence. This is exactly what I mean, I said quietly. Let them look, she replied. As long as we give them nothing to confirm. Her confidence both steadied and unsettled me. I don't want to be the reason they question your leadership. She studied me carefully. You wouldn't be the reason. Then what would? Fear, she answered. The word landed heavy. You think I'm afraid? I asked. I think you've trained yourself not to want anything that could destabilize your world. That hit too close. You don't understand what it took to rebuild after losing my wife. Her expression softened instantly. You're right, she said gently. I don't. The air shifted again. Less confrontation. More truth. She moved toward the window, staring out at the city. When my father handed me this company, the board didn't believe in me, she said quietly. They thought I was temporary. Emotional. Too young. You proved them wrong. Yes. She turned. And I did it alone. There it was. The loneliness behind the authority. I don't need saving, she added. I know. But I am tired of pretending I don't feel anything. The honesty in her voice stripped away the CEO image. She wasn't asking for permission. She was confessing. I don't flirt with employees, she continued. I don't blur lines. I don't risk headlines. Then why me? I asked again, softer this time. She walked closer. Because I needed to hear it. Because you don't look at my title when you speak to me. Her eyes locked onto mine. You look at me. The room felt smaller. You challenge me, she said. You don't try to impress me. And when you almost kissed me, you stopped. I didn't want to disrespect you. That's exactly why. Her voice dropped. I trust men who can stop. The statement carried weight. Respect. Desire. Control. All at once. I swallowed slowly. If we do this, I said carefully, it can't be secret. It won't be. It can't be impulsive. It won't be. And it can't interfere with my work. A faint smile touched her lips. Daniel, if anything, it will improve it. I almost laughed. The tension eased slightly. But the undercurrent remained. She stepped closer again. This time, closer than ever in her office. Her voice softened. I don't want to lose you over whispers. I'm not going anywhere. Not because you feel obligated, she said quickly. Because you choose to stay. The word choose echoed between us. You're asking me to take a risk, I said. No, she corrected gently. I'm asking you to decide if I'm worth one. That was the moment. Not the balcony. Not the almost kiss. This. Vulnerability without performance. Power without armor. I don't enter situations halfway, I said quietly. Neither do I. Silence stretched. But this time it wasn't tense. It was clear. I stepped forward. Closing the space intentionally. If we move forward, I said, holding her gaze steadily, it's because we both want something real. Her breath shifted. Yes. No games. Never. No power plays. Her eyes softened. Daniel. I don't need control with you. The statement carried more meaning than she probably intended. The room felt warmer. Closer. The noise of the building distant. I lifted my hand slightly. Paused. She nodded once. Permission. My fingers brushed lightly against her waist, respectful, steady. Not possession. Connection. Her hand rested against my chest. Calm. Intentional. We'll handle the rumors, she said softly. Together. She held my gaze. Yes. Together. The word felt right. Not reckless. Not forbidden. Earned. A second knock interrupted us again. Reality returning. We stepped back. Professional masks sliding back into place. Come in, she called evenly. As the door opened, she was CEO again. Commanding. Controlled. But as I reached the door to leave, she said quietly, Daniel. I turned. Her voice softened just enough for only me to hear. Friday isn't a risk. I waited. It's a choice. And for the first time since the whispers started, I didn't feel afraid of being seen. Friday didn't feel like the end of a work week. It felt like the beginning of a decision. All day, the office buzzed the way it always did, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, quiet conversations happening behind glass walls. But underneath it all, there was awareness. She stayed in her lane. I stayed in mine. Professional. Focused. Measured. No lingering looks. No unnecessary stops at her office. If anyone was watching, they saw nothing. And that was intentional. At 6:45 p.m., I shut down my computer. My reflection in the dark screen looked steadier than I felt. I wasn't wearing my usual work suit. Tonight, it was a charcoal tailored jacket, open collar, no tie. Less corporate. More personal. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't need to. The restaurant she chose overlooked the Chicago River. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Soft golden lighting. A place where privacy wasn't secrecy, it was design. When I walked in, I saw her immediately. She was standing near the window, speaking briefly to the host. She wore a deep emerald green dress, elegant, structured, graceful without being loud. Her hair was down tonight, softer around her shoulders. She wasn't holding a phone. She wasn't reviewing documents. She was just there, waiting. And when her eyes found mine, something shifted. Not CEO. Not employee. Just a woman seeing the man she had chosen to meet. "You're on time," she said as I approached. I had a good example. A small smile curved her lips. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking." There it was again. Choice. Dinner started easy. Safe topics. The city. Travel. Books. She told me about building the company in its early years, the nights she slept on a couch in her first office. I told her about Lily's obsession with dinosaurs and how she insists pancakes taste better shaped like stars. She listened when I spoke. Really listened. Not waiting to respond. Just present. And somewhere between the appetizer and the main course, the air shifted. "You seem different tonight," I said quietly. "How?" "Lighter." She looked down briefly, then back at me. I don't have to be the strongest person in the room here. The honesty in that sentence did more to me than any flirtation ever could. "You don't have to be strong with me," I said. Her eyes held mine. "And you don't have to be unbreakable." The restaurant noise faded into background blur. Soft music. Muted conversations. Clinking glasses. But at our table, the space felt private. Intentional. "Do you regret agreeing to this?" she asked gently. "No. Not even a little." I shook my head. "Do you?" She didn't hesitate. "No." The confidence in her answer wasn't sharp. It was calm. Secure. After dinner, we stepped outside onto the river walk. The city lights reflected on the water like scattered gold. The air was cool but not cold. She walked beside me, not in front. Not behind. Beside. "You know this changes things," I said. "Yes. We won't be invisible after tonight. I'm not interested in hiding." Her hand brushed mine accidentally. Or maybe not accidentally. Neither of us pulled away. "I built my life on control," she said quietly as we walked. "Schedules. Strategy. Predictable outcomes. And this isn't predictable." "No." She stopped walking. Turning toward me. The river behind her shimmered in the city glow. "This is intentional," she corrected. The distinction mattered. I stepped closer. Not rushed. Not impulsive. Just steady. "Isabella." She inhaled softly when I said her name like that. Not Ms. Morgan. Not CEO. Just Isabella. "If we do this," I said quietly, "I don't want it to be because of tension. Or rebellion. Or adrenaline." Her eyes searched mine. "Then what do you want it to be?" "Because when I look at you, I see someone I respect. Someone I want beside me. Not above me. Not below me." Her breath trembled slightly. "And if it gets complicated?" "It will," I admitted. "And if the board questions you?" "They can. And if people talk?" "They already are." Silence stretched between us. But it wasn't heavy. It was full. "You're not afraid anymore," she observed softly. "I am," I said honestly. "But I'm not running." That was the difference. The wind moved gently across the river. Her hair shifted. Her hand lifted slowly, resting lightly against my chest. Right where my heartbeat was steady but strong. "You're sure?" she whispered. "Yes." Her eyes dropped briefly to my mouth. Then back to my eyes. The same look from the hallway. The balcony. The library. But this time, no office walls. No glass ceilings. No boardroom doors. Just us. "If you keep looking at my lips like that," she murmured softly, a faint smile touching her mouth. I stepped closer. "This time," I said quietly, "I'm not stopping." She didn't step back. She didn't hesitate. She closed the distance. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't reckless. It was slow. Intentional. Her hand steadied against my chest as mine rested gently at her waist. Warmth. Clarity. Connection. The city didn't disappear. It stayed right there, alive, glowing, real. But for those few seconds, it felt like it was witnessing something earned. Not stolen. Not forbidden. Chosen. When we pulled back, her forehead rested lightly against mine. No panic. No regret. Just breath shared in quiet understanding. "Well," she said softly, a hint of humor returning, "that was very unprofessional." I smiled. "Good thing we're off the clock." She laughed quietly, not the polished boardroom laugh. A real one. "I don't want this to be a secret," she said. "It won't be. I don't want it to affect your growth. It won't. And if it ever does, I'll tell you. Trust." Simple. Direct. She stepped back slightly, but her hand slid into mine naturally. Effortless. "I've spent years being seen as untouchable," she said softly. "You're not." "I know," she replied, squeezing my hand gently. "Not with you." We began walking again along the river. Not CEO and employee. Not risk and consequence. Just two adults who had looked at the line and stepped over it together. Not because it was forbidden, but because it felt right. And as the Chicago skyline shimmered behind us, I realized something. The rumors. The risk. The board. They weren't the real challenge. The real challenge was letting someone close enough to matter. And for the first time in years, I wasn't guarding my heart like it was fragile. I was offering it. And she was meeting me halfway. This wasn't the end of complication. It wasn't the end of pressure. It wasn't the end of whispers. But it was the beginning of something honest. And this time, we weren't almost crossing the line. We had chosen it. Together.